Hello, welcome to this video, and on this video I'm going to be going through what I think are the 10 greatest songs or tunes or whatever you want to call them by Jimi Hendrix, and I'll be ranking them from 10 to 1. I really wanted to do a ranking of the albums of Jimi Hendrix, and it's baffling that somebody who really only worked for about 3 or 4 years was able to create so much incredible music that since Jimi Hendrix's death in 1970, there's been a plethora of albums out. And also I think bad record deals and all sorts of different things means that there's literally hundreds of albums come out with the same material, packaged up in different ways, and in some cases other tracks where they've had people overdub new parts onto them, and then those albums are gone. It's just an absolute minefield. I'm nowhere near enough as an expert to know about these albums to really be able to form some sort of coherent discography. If you go to Wikipedia and check out the discography, you will be faced with 3 studio albums and then 3 live albums, and one of those is released afterwards. This would be his first album, Axis Boulder's Love. His first album, Are You Experienced, that was recorded in 1966 and 1967, and then followed up by Axis Boulder's Love, and then his huge epic, which was Electric Ladyland, the double album. There was some material then released pretty much after his death on the album, Cry of Love. He also released in his lifetime a live album with the Band of Gypsies. And there is also the albums that came from his performances at Woodstock and Monterey, and they seem to form the basic catalogue for Jimi Hendrix. But of course there is so much other material. As a young guy coming up in the early 80s, discovering Jimi Hendrix and very quickly becoming an absolute super fan of Hendrix, I would go out and buy the albums that were available, and in a lot of cases these were lots and lots of different weird compilation albums. I never really sat down and listened to a Hendrix album when I was a massive Hendrix fan. The only album I had was Axis Boulder's Love. I didn't have Electric Ladyland and I didn't have Are You Experienced, but I had virtually all of those tracks on all sorts of different combinations. But I also had live albums that he'd done with the BBC. I got live at Winterland. There's a whole host of stuff. It's really hard. So this guy must have been recorded and playing live and making albums every day of his life between 1966 and 1970. It's an astonishing catalogue of creativity. And when I say astonishing, I really believe that in terms of rock music, pop music, soul, funk, fusion and prog, I think Hendrix was the greatest. I think Hendrix was the greatest of them all. I think he's untouchable in every single way. There's a spirit and there's an abandon to what he does, which makes him, for me, like Louis Armstrong is to jazz, Hendrix is to all this music we love. He is the guy that is really playing it. Everyone else is pretending. Everyone else is emulating. Everyone else is trying to be something they're not. Hendrix just purely is. And that's his legacy, and it will never be matched. So, as a precursor to ranking the 10 greatest albums, or even ranking all the albums if I'm able to do such a thing, I decided, just have a little bit of a dry run and do the 10 greatest songs, which is much easier to do because with a wealth of such songs, it's very easy to just think, well, what's my favourite song and what song's really important, and that blew me away. And very quickly I came up with a list that I've just fiddled around with. Now, usually when I do a list, I leave it for a few days or weeks and keep coming back to it. I have literally just written this one, and I'll tell you why, because as I was doing the list, I was listening to the songs on the list, and I was so unbelievably inspired, so blown away. Recently I did an assessment of the Beatles. I went through the Beatles catalogue. The Beatles, up until around about 1968, are leading the way. They're untouchable. They're just breaking every single one. Then suddenly in 1968, their genius is still there, but you feel like, and it's with the album, where would this start to happen? Round about the White Album, there seems to be a change. And although the stuff is groundbreaking, it doesn't seem to have the feel of that exploring, like an explorer in new lands. It's suddenly that's gone. And I thought, this is interesting, why aren't I getting the same feeling, you know? And then suddenly, going to listen to Hendrix and realise Hendrix has come along. And Hendrix must have just absolutely sent a bolt of creative lightning into the music world at that time. It's unbelievable. So I looked at these songs that I'd sort of just quickly gone, well, I love that one and that one's got to go on. And I looked and I put them into a rough audio. And then as I started to listen to them, you start to realise what landmarks each of these songs are. These are all landmark songs for one reason or another. These are 10 of the greatest songs in the history of rock music. And each one is way ahead of what anyone else is doing at the time. So this is going to be my 10, I suppose it's my 10 favourite song. I put the 10 greatest songs. I think they are, you know, they're amongst his 10 greatest, and I've tried to rank them, and the ranking is really based upon my own personal taste, but I think we've got some classics in here. So shall we kick off? So at number 10 we have Spanish Castle Magic, which is on the second album, Axis Bold as Love. For me, Spanish Castle Magic is just the definition of Hendrix. It's just your standard Hendrix song. It's got an incredible riff. It's got an incredible sort of broken up vocal. This is something Hendrix does a lot. You know, you get da 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 da. It's really far away. Ba da 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 da. If you travel by dan dan, and you get all this punctuation, like it's a question and answer basically. This is something Led Zeppelin are going to use a lot in their career. Hendrix did so much stuff that there's a lot of incredible stuff, you know, and he could write riffs. This is a killer riff. And this album, which I think was recorded sort of 67, 68, nobody sounds like that. The only other band that we could put along the Jimi Hendrix Experience at this point in time is Cream. And Cream are absolutely groundbreaking. And I have championed their work on here so much and said how so important they are. And they're important because they just slightly pip Hendrix to the post. I mean, we're talking by months. When Hendrix arrives in London, he changed the scene. Now, how much he influenced what Cream were going to do, I don't think that's the way it happened. I think Cream were already going, because he famously got up on stage with Cream. But I think Hendrix saw what Cream was doing, because he had come out of the sort of rhythm and blues chitlin circuit. And what he's doing here is not that. This is drenched in the electrification of blues that was happening in the UK already. And Hendrix comes on, he's like the real deal, suddenly walks into town and goes, oh God, they're playing the blues, but they're doing this, but they're playing all these long guitar solos. I want to play long guitar solos and all this type of stuff, and he just sits in. So Cream pip him to the post, but in 1968, what have Cream got in their arsenal that is up against Spanish Castle Magic? This is rock music 101. It's an absolute work of genius. Also, the lyrics and this idea of stuff that the way he's pulling fire, you know, the idea of flying on butterflies, the imagery is so psychedelic. Everyone's going on about, you know, Lucy in the Sky of Diamonds, and the Beatles are doing all this, and we've got like a Piper at the Gates of Dawn, Pink Floyd. This is all 1967. And then Hendrix comes out and he's the embodiment of psychedelia. It's like, it's as though he's everything that's coming out of him, what he looks like, how he dresses, how he plays the guitar, how he writes music, how he produces, and also the poetry of what he says is just drenched with this feeling of expansiveness and a sort of almost like how would you describe it? Highly romantic and yet Nietzschean view of the world. You know, he's not. He writes about his own personal experience. He's so influenced by Dylan. This is really obvious. I think Bob Dylan's a key to understanding Jimi Hendrix, and he is so influenced by Dylan. But his take on Dylan is to take that sort of almost like, Dylan had a poetry and a confessional poetry that could be quite surreal, almost pulling into sort of Alice in Wonderland. These very English things. The English literary sort of history of the surreal. And Dylan goes there. He goes there a little bit, but with Hendrix, you just get it in bucket loads. It is the perfect. Hendrix is the perfect embodiment of the American music aesthetic, American cultural aesthetic, jazz, the blues, rhythm and blues, and the English aesthetic. And he seems to be completely happy in both areas. So it's not like this guy's come from America and he's bringing all these blues in, because that's not what Hendrix does. This is not Buddy Guy. This is not Freddie King. This is something else. And when we listen to the lyrics of Spanish Castle Magic, we can hear that. On the same album as Spanish Castle Magic is another song which is called If 6 Was 9. And that is the track I've got at number 9. Now, 20 odd years ago, I formed a band with the singer Robert Plant called The Prior of Brian. And on that, Robert deliberately and systematically pulled on the influences that had informed him and therefore Led Zeppelin. And we looked at, songs by Moby Grape, by Love, Buffalo Springfield. It was a whole bunch of, San Francisco-based psychedelic bands, and then bits of James Brown, English folk music, Bob Dylan. We did all this stuff. He did one Hendrix song. We did one Hendrix song, and we played it towards the end of the life of the band. Now, I do have a very, very rare recording of us playing it, and I may put it onto this video if I can track it down and put it on. So at the end of here, if you hang around, there might be that track. Now I've said it, it's got to go there, hasn't it? So I'll have to try and dig it out. It's on mini disc, so I've got to transfer it anyway. And it's a rough room recording of us playing If 6 Was 9. So that is the track that Robert referred to as being an influence. I went and listened to it just before I shot this video, and If 6 Was 9 is an incredible tune. He is literally turning the world upside down. He's taken the number 6 and he's turning it upside down, and he's asking the question, what would it be like if the whole world was on? He's inverting the whole world. Musically, what's interesting about this, it's got a really ventilated sound. Da-dum. If the sun... No, he goes... If 6 Was 9 has this ventilated riff in it, which I cannot... normally I forget words, but I don't normally forget tunes of music. When we get that, that pull up there, which of course, and the reason why I've got confused is because as soon as I sung it in my head, I heard Good Times, Bad Times by Led Zeppelin. And that's what put me off, because I could hear that in my head. This track is pretty long. Hendrix wasn't one for going in for epics, because nobody was there. No rock or pop artist at that time was going over the 10-minute mark on records. That was something that developed. And a lot of that comes out of the exploration that we see on the live albums. For a studio track, If 6 Was 9, I think it's the longest track on Axis Bold of Love. And it's that moment where Hendrix pushes the thing forward. He pushes the psychedelia. And we are really in the territory of like jazz rock fusion here. And this is way back in 67, 68. No one else was playing anything like that. Right, at number 8, I have got the track Stone Free. Now, Stone Free is interesting. It's one of my most favourite Hendrix songs. It's just got a groove to it and a swagger to it. And to me, if he'd have recorded that in 1976, it would be groundbreaking and incredible. But believe it or not, Stone Free is the second recording that the Jimi Hendrix Experience made. So in 1966, this is incredible. In 1966, Hendrix went into the studio and he recorded his first single, Hey Joe. I haven't included this on the list, so if you're getting all excited thinking I'm going to put it on, I'm not going to put it on. I may do a whole video on the history of Hey Joe, which is why I haven't put it on here. I will come back to it. For me, it's not exemplary Hendrix. It's his first single. It's got its foot in the sort of folk tradition, American folk tradition, and the sort of balladeering, and it's not quite a Hendrix song to me, except for the run-up riff, you know. But anyway, they needed a B-side for that record, so they went back in and they recorded Stone Free, and Stone Free is full on Jimi Hendrix. It's got everything that you would expect from. So it shows his vision was completely there when he forms this band, the Jimi Hendrix Experience. It's so weird, and it didn't come out on the first album, which I think was a mistake. It just floated around. And then eventually, I think in 68, 69, they brought out an album called Smash Hits, which was the only sort of greatest hits album that was released in his time. The first album I ever bought by Jimi Hendrix was an album called Stone Free, and it collected together a whole bunch of different stuff. Classic recordings of Jimi Hendrix, but also some of the later sort of Jack Douglas produced stuff where they got it, you know, other musicians overdubbing in, I think, later stuff. It was a whole mix mash, and I can remember that the stuff that was right at the end of his career, I couldn't differentiate between that and Stone Free. Stone Free just sounded like Easy Riding, which is a similar track that he recorded right at the end of his career. And so I find this track shocking. All right, I really find it shocking. Now, I think the next single he then comes out with is like Purple Haze, and Purple Haze is the very definition of what Hendrix, and of course that will be on the list in a minute. But that's what I've got at number 8 is Stone Free. And the thing with Stone Free, it's funky and it's soul-y. It's just incredible. And here we must mention the band he's got. Now, it's an interesting band, this. Noel Redding is not a bass player. He is a guitar player, so he's sort of filling in on bass. This happened a lot in the 60s. If you think of Jimmy Page joining the Yardbirds to fill in on bass, you know, on Electric Ladyland, we've got Hendrix playing bass. The evolution of the bass guitarist hasn't happened quite yet. It's people like Jack Bruce and John Entwistle that are going to do that historically. So Noel Redding comes in on bass. Now, I think the story is that Noel Redding had the look. Noel Redding would contribute to backing vocals, and there's some cool backing vocals on the Axis Fold as Love. But what Noel Redding brings to the band, not being a bass player like Jack Bruce, who was all over the place at Cream, is he roots it, and he plays in a very solid fashion. And quite often his bass riffs are the archetypal heart and soul of the track. If you think of something like Hey Joe, that run up, you know, Noel's doing that as well. So he is coming out of a sort of folk rock tradition. There's no jazz there at all, and he's playing a very timekeeping metronomic role. Mitch Mitchell, on the other hand, is something else. This is a guy that you could tell has just studied Tony Williams, Elvin Jones, but especially Tony Williams. And he's not just some rock copyist. He can really play proper jazz drums. He's an incredible jazz drummer. And I'll get onto this as we go through the ranking here. And he has a swagger, and he has a groove, and he has a funk, and he has a way of playing off Hendrix, which is going to be absolutely groundbreaking. You know, the Cream was more collective improvisation, but they definitely pioneer this. But this idea of having a riff that is this really solid riff, and then the guitars and drums just going for it, going completely mad, that is embodied in the Jimi Hendrix Experience. So yeah, and you could hear it all over Stone Free, and some of those fills that Mitch Mitchell plays as he breaks up the middle section before the guitar solo come in, they're just so exciting. Nobody's playing like this. There isn't a band, I don't think, on the planet that sound like that at this point in time. Right, at number 7, I have an astonishing track, and I should have put this up, but you got to look what he's competing against. At number 7, I have Third Stone from the Sun. Talking about that jazz influence, this is where Mitch Mitchell comes into his own on this track. Third Stone from the Sun is the longest track on the first album. For me, I cannot believe that this track was even recorded in 66, 67. That album was made late 1966, early 1967. So when that track's coming out, the Beatles are sort of pulling together Sgt. Pepper. Pink Floyd's pulling together Piper at the Gates of Dawn. You know, the Doors have just about got their debut album. This is what everyone's doing. And go and listen to Third Stone from the Sun. It's an instrumental for a start. It's like an instrumental with psychedelic voices swimming around. You know, that melody. You know, all of that. This is just... I cannot actually put into words what this track does. And then the improvisation and the psychedelia. I mean, the trouble with Hendrix is we never think of him. I have done a million expositions of the history of jazz rock fusion and never mentioned Third Stone for the Sun. I've mentioned, like, you know, Machine Gun and tracks like that, but I've never mentioned this track. And here we have in 1966, 67, I think it's early 67, we have Hendrix opening up a track with Mitch Mitchell playing proper jazz drums. He's swinging. He's putting in all the embellishments. He's all putting in all the kicks and the stops. And we have that Noel Redding locked bass line. You know, that we got that going on. And then Hendrix comes in with that beautiful sliding melody. And then it goes off on just jazz rock odyssey, to quote Spinal Tap. That's what we get on the first album. The production's incredible. I put it on this morning. It sounds incredible. I think because this band could make so much noise, unlike the Beatles, they could basically just mic up the band, you know, record them in stereo and have a few tracks and drop a few psychedelic sounds on. It's beautifully recorded. The drum sound, I am gushing about this. I have. This is why I thought I want to take the video now, because just going and listen to all these songs again, just putting them on, and just going, oh my God, this guy's the best. This is the best. This guy's the best. You want to know who the best is? Jimi Hendrix. Right. At number 6, I have The Wind Cries Mary. This is also off the first album. It's surprising how many tracks off the first album I went to, because I think that's the groundbreaking album. When I think last year I did a video where I went through the greatest debut albums of all time. And my rule was that it had to be the band's greatest album. Right, that was the rule. Not people listened to me saying that at the beginning of the video. So if the band had then surpassed on a follow-up album and been even greater than the debut, I wouldn't class it. It had to be that they came in, did their statement, and that was the greatest. And a lot of people said, what about Jimi Hendrix's first album, which is incredible? And I went, yeah, but he surpassed it. He surpassed it. But there's an argument that what's on that first album is the statement of what Hendrix is going to do. He's just going to elaborate on it. And there's a strong argument that this could well be his greatest album, the first album. I've always held it's that Electric Ladyland's the greatest, which is an album that I'm not that familiar with, actually. I never had it when I was growing up. I think I've had every single track off it on different compilation albums. Going back and listening to this first album again this morning, especially after all the work I've been doing of, you know, studying the trajectory of, you know, the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and the Who, and trying to get my head around what was going on in the 1960s. And then you hit that first album, 1967, and it's just like, whoa. And this is what I'm going to be saying over and over again. Hendrix is not just the blues guitarist. He's not just the psychedelic guy in the headband. He's not just the guy doing, you know, Purple Haze and, you know, Excuse Me While I Kiss the Sky. He was an incredible songwriter, like one of the greatest songwriters in rock music. This is another thing, and this isn't going to get mentioned, is it? And where's the proof? Well, listen to The Wind Cries Mary. Listen to that on the first album. Listen to the songwriting. Listen to his arrangement, and listen to his lyrics, which are absolutely beautiful. Hendrix is not getting the credit anymore that he should be getting. The Beatles are still there. You know, everyone's going on about Queen. This is why I said Queen were overrated. They're an incredible band. But at the moment, we're losing, culturally, we're losing Hendrix. And at the end of this video, I'll say what I think is the reason why we're losing Hendrix. Right, so number 6, Wind Cries Mary, a beautiful song. At number 5, I have his one epic, the one epic he made in his own lifetime, which is off the album Electric Ladyland. It was done in 1968, and it is 1983, brackets, and Merman, I Should Turn to Be. This is avant-garde, psychedelic, electric jazz exploration. That's what, you know, what else can I say? He beautifully controls, over about 13 minutes, an incredible abstract composition, which never quite delivers until the end what you associate with Hendrix. It is controlled, and it opens up in a very subtle way, compositionally. It sounds like one long jam, but it's not, because it's moving through a whole bunch of different like worlds, basically, as the song develops, and it's moving towards Hendrix pulling on the full majestic Hendrix. The majestic Hendrix is the only way to describe it. This is Hendrix's epic. In terms of progressive rock, I'm trying to think of anybody that was anywhere near this at this time. You know, this on any other album, this could have been a whole side. In fact, the whole side seems to work as one whole. And if it had just been named as a suite, this could be the first side-long epic in rock music. It pretty much is. Hendrix there, you know, I know Zappa's doing like King Kong on Uncle Meat. Uncle Meat was recorded between sort of 67 and I think about 68, 69. Zappa's doing very similar things, and it's interesting that they were crossing over and they knew each other, and you know, they were hooking up, because listening to the stuff now, especially this type of stuff, the more way out stuff, the only other person I could think is doing the same sort of thing is Frank Zappa. And knowing how important Zappa is in the history of rock music and how groundbreaking he was, we see the same thing with this. I put this at quite high because I think this is probably Hendrix is his most out there. Right, so at number 4, I have a track off the album Band of Gypsies. When I was growing up, Band of Gypsies was my favourite Hendrix album. All I was interested in was the guitar solos. I wasn't so much interested in the studio experimenting or the beautiful ballads like, you know, Little Wing and all that sort of stuff. I wanted to hear Hendrix blow. If you want to just hear Hendrix blow, the album is Band of Gypsies. Here he's got a different trio with Billy Cox on bass and Buddy Miles on drums. It's a much blacker sound, a much funkier sound, and it is basically a power trio. So when Hendrix is soloing, there's no keyboards to back it up, and because of that, it gives him the space, and it's live. And in the mix of all this, he does a long track called Machine Gun, which I would say is possibly my favourite Hendrix track, but I haven't put it in number 1 because I think there's a couple of ones that are far more important than that. But for me, Hendrix is at his peak, and this is perhaps some of the greatest rock guitaring, if not the greatest rock guitaring ever recorded, is on his guitar solo on the track Machine Gun. Now, of course, he is trying here. This is a protest song. This is a song against Vietnam. This is a black empowerment song. It's about, you know, black Americans not wanting to go and kill what they saw as people that in the same boat as them. You know, Muhammad Ali at this time is standing up and questioning this. So Hendrix goes out on stage and he does this track Machine Guns, where he emulates the sound of a machine gun. He emulates the cries. He emulates warfare. Now, what we know as jazz fusion, these long sort of Coltrane-esque guitar solos shot through electric, you know, feedback in guitar, the stuff that John McLaughlin's going to do later on. This starts here, and we forget that it is an exposition about war. It's unbelievable. There's a moment, and everyone knows it, where he starts trilling on the guitar, and he then depresses the tremolo arm, and he makes that trill bend up and down. And it sounds almost like a siren, or maybe even a helicopter traveling over the foresty areas of Vietnam. And in that moment, Hendrix is no longer playing the blues. He's no longer playing pop music. He's not playing rock music. He's not playing jazz. He's not even playing free jazz, although this is the only thing we can compare it to. When he does that and he starts making those sounds, he's opening up a world that is going to become more and more important in the history of rock music. It goes back to Louis Armstrong. It goes back to the coloration of music with random sounds. This is something that's really interesting in the history of music. As soon as you start recording, you can bring in random sounds. It's like, if you think of like a tune like I Like Driving in My Car by Madness, or Money by Pink Floyd. There are sound effects that are integral to the composition of that tune. These aren't necessarily musical sounds. John Cage is the one that's, with his 4 minutes and 33 seconds, which is 4 minutes and 33 seconds of musicians sat there doing nothing, and he's not 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence, but he's making you aware that anything can be music if you frame it and focus on it. And that's what recording does. Now, Hendrix was the master of this. All his albums are dripping with these non-musical elements that have been made musical. But not only does he do that with sound effects, he does that with the guitar itself, through the use of feedback and all sorts of things. The peak of this guitar solo is that moment. It's absolutely incredible. It's one of the greatest moments in rock music. Right, I'm gushing. I can't believe, this is what I want to catch this on. I love this bloke. I just love him so much. At number 3, I have Purple Haze. That flat 5 introduction, iconic, and then like this is a pop song. This is a hit record, right? We've had this big angular riff that sounds like the devil. Then we get the guitar introduction. We're into the song. There's no vocal. Purple haze all in my brain. This is insane stuff. It's just like, this is the moment that Hendrix arrives. This is the moment, I think, when rock music becomes heavy. We can go on about the Kinks with You Really Got Me. We can go on about Sunshine of Your Love by Cream. We could go on about Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones. That riff, that's heavy. We can go on about The Who with My Generation and those bass runs that John. All that's there. But there's an aspect of heaviness. I've always said heavy metal is based upon darkness. It's based upon invoking something demonic. That's what Hendrix does here on this record. It's Beelzebub himself, who we feel is involved in the creation of this. And that thing of Purple Haze is all in my. Maybe saying things don't seem the same. Ask anyone who don't know why. Accuse me while I kiss the sky. All of that. You've got that psychedelic thing. Only Hendrix has this. He's telling you a story. Then he said, hang on, excuse me, I've just got to kiss the sky. It's pure Hendrix. But the idea of something being in his brain, this idea that then crops up with in Paranoid by Black Sabbath. If you take Communication Breakdown by Zeppelin, and then the sort of this idea of your mind, being infused by this sort of craziness. And you put that together, we get Paranoid by Black Sabbath, and we can see all these things coming together. I want to do a video on heaviness. It was a thing I discovered when I was 11, 12 years old. I liked music, and then suddenly I became aware that there was this type of music, and it was heavy. All kids have this. Heaviness in 20th century music, I think, is perhaps the most important quality that was created in 20th century music. It's a bizarre thought. And if that is the case, Purple Haze plays a huge part. Right. At number 2, from Electric Ladyland, we have All Along the Watchtower. Now, I've got to admit that all these songs are as great as each other. There's no argument that Purple Haze is really not as good as All Along the Watchtower. The tune that got me into Hendrix, because I got into Hendrix in a funny way. I was listening to a lot of rock bands. I was listening to, Iron Maiden and UFO, Judas Priest. I got into all that stuff, and my dad, he said, if you like this, you need to listen to Jimi Hendrix. And I said, who's he? He said, a guitar player. And around about that time, and this was probably around about 79, 80, as we were going into the new decade of the 1980s, there was a documentary on the TV that sort of went through the history of rock and roll, starting with, Buddy Holly and Rock Around the Clock, Bill Haley, Elvis Presley, and then the Beatles and all that type of stuff. And I think it ended up with Van Halen and, I don't know, maybe ELO or something. They got no idea that punk was about to happen. They got no idea that dance music or rap was going to happen. It sort of ended up there. And on that, they had a clip of Hendrix. Now, I'd never seen him before. And in my mind, I have tried to work out what that clip was I saw. I think I know what clip it is. And I think it was a guitar solo from maybe Monterey. I'm not too sure. Anyway, when I saw this as a very young person just getting into music, this was something else. I couldn't believe it. And so I said to my dad, what's a good track to get by Jimi Hendrix? He said, All Along the Watchtower. You've got to hear that track. So I went down and I bought this album called Stone Free. And I took it home, and being impatient, the first track I put on, don't want to hear what it sounded like, was All Along the Watchtower. Now, the thing that's remarkable about All Along the Watchtower is it's just so full of incredibleness. For a start, this is a Bob Dylan song. Well, it could be a Bob Dylan song. I have reason to believe, and I might have to explore this on a later video, but I have reason to believe through my sources that are not in books that All Along the Watchtower was actually written by Richie Havens and not Bob Dylan. Anyway, I'll let that sink in and I'll move on. What? What did Daddy just say? Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. Anyway, but it's an incredible piece of songwriting. The lyrics are, wherever they've come from, possibly Bob Dylan, have that sort of beatniky, jazz poetry, psychedelic aspect to them. Beautiful lyrics. Hendrix takes this song, which is very straightforward song in Dylan's hands, and turns it into an absolute masterpiece. Starting with that incredible opening run, and this is off at Electric Ladyland, where Hendrix is exploring the studio so deeply. So it's hard to know what the hell's going on when it starts off. And then we have that bar of 9/8, which kicks you into sort of another realm rhythmically, and you just have to find yourself. And then you're in this, world of the Watchtower that we were all along, And it's the song goes out very, very psychedelic. When it gets to the guitar solo, it's like Jimi Hendrix went, I'm going to do everything that a guitarist can do. Right? And you get this chapter by chapter, continually shifting guitar sound, continually shifting guitar approach, continually shifting, between short notes and long notes, high notes. And it's quite a short solo. It could well be the greatest guitar solo ever made, couldn't it, this one? It could easily be, until I get to number one, or Machine Gun. It's just, that guitar solo's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. So often I think now, kids are, checking out Hendrix, they're going on YouTube, put Jimi Hendrix in, and they're seeing Monterey, or they're seeing Woodstock, or they're seeing the other live videos are out there. I had all these videos when I was a kid. I spent all my time actually watching Hendrix on video. For someone who was only in 3 years, I couldn't believe how much he was filmed. He must have been photographed and filmed every single day of his life. Incredible. But it takes away what actually he's doing in the studio. Right, it's unbelievable, and it is so perfect. Live, it's like wild abandon. In the studio, it is so unbelievably controlled, more controlled than the Beatles, more controlled than anybody else at that time. And all Along the Watchtower is a brilliant example of that. It's just mind blowing. So we now arrive at number one, and then the track I've got at number one is Voodoo Child. Now, Voodoo Child for me is a return near the end of his career to the blues. It's on Electric Ladyland. He does two versions of it, a slow blues and then the reprise. This is obviously the famous reprise. It's really like based around a sort of Killing Floor type riff. The reason I put it at number 1 is that this was a single. It came out, I think, just after Jimmy had died. They put it out as a single. It went to number 1. I can't even think of any track that's ever gone to number 1 or been a hit record or where. I'm not too sure the chops him. I know it did really well. I can't think of any hit record that sounds like that. It's just astonishing. It's just astonishing. And with all this, I've tried to focus on all the non-blues stuff, all the non-Buddy Guy, the non-Freddie King. With Voodoo Child, he manages to distill 2 really important elements. And one is his psychedelic, visionary lyrics with the blues, but the blues personified like no one else has ever had it. Hendrix had a spirit and sound on the guitar that no one's ever matched. Now, he gets compared, obviously, with the history of guitar playing. We can then get Jimmy Page come out, we know, and then when we get Richie Blackmore comes out, all these guitarists come out at the same time, and then we get the Michael Schenkers, or we get the Randy Rhodes, and the Yngwie Malmsteen, and the Steve Vais, and now we've got the Matteo Mancuzos, and we've got Al Holdsworth, and all this. I think, you know, contemporary guitar players or young guitar players learning the instrument, they go back and listen to Hendrix, and they can't hear that all their heroes are taken from Hendrix. You know, there is no rock guitar without Hendrix. So they can't hear that, but they don't seem to realise where the virtuosity lies. I have, as a music teacher, I've sat in classes with a young guitarist going, do you think Hendrix is any good? He doesn't seem that good to me, sir. You know, if you compare him to, like, they mentioned whatever guitarists are around that. I mean, he doesn't play like that, can't do that, blah, 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 and all these sort of things. I think kids, they do not respond to Hendrix in a guitar way as they would respond to the sort of Instagram guitarists. And then the rock kids don't seem to respond to Hendrix like they would to Black Sabbath or Led Zeppelin, which is still huge, or even more so Queen. And so you see that Hendrix he seems to be losing his cultural capital at the moment. And I think the reason for that is because what he was doing was just too far ranging. And so if you're a rock guy, even though Hendrix came up with 1 million classic riffs, there's too many tracks that haven't got classic riffs on. If you're a guitar guy, there's 1 million tracks where he doesn't really play the guitar that much on. It's more about the songs. And it worries me because Hendrix is the greatest. Hendrix is the best. Everybody knows it. I'm sure if I had Jimmy Page and Robert Plant in here, or I had Richie Blackmore in here, if I could line them all up, all the gods, if they all sat next to me now, and I said, who's the greatest? Who do you think the greatest is? They would say Jimi Hendrix. It's true. And that's what I wanted to get across on this video. I want to explore deeper into what he's doing, and I will try and take some of the albums on. It might be that I take each album on as a time and then try and do a collective of the other albums that have come out and go through some of the albums I've got that aren't proper albums that were pretty. That's what I might do. Anyway, that's the end of the video. If you like this video, please like it. If you want to see some more, subscribe. If you want to support me, you can go to my Patreon and support me there, or you can put a little bit of cash for me into my PayPal tip jar, which is down below there, which I appreciate, and I am living off at the moment, so thank you very much. So we'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.